and the people around him recognized him as that. I can give you thousands of examples of this from his history, but we don't have time as we have a very important topic to cover. At the age of 25, he began to work for a widow whose name was Khadija radiallahu anha. She sent her slave girl to observe Muhammad as he traded on her behalf. She came back and reported to her of his honesty and his integrity. Khadija had many proposals for marriage. She did not take any. She herself proposed to marry Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She was 40 years old. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was 25. His uncle took responsibility of the marriage, and the marriage was done with Khadija. From the age of 25 to the age of 40, he leads a very simple life. He does not get even trading stocks. What he has with Khadija the Kubra, they live on that as a very happy married couple. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam spends his time helping the weak, the widow, and the orphans. Let me relate a story from his life at that period of time. One day he comes home looking very sad. His wife asks him, "What is the matter, oh my husband?" He said, "I found a widow and her children in Makkah, but I had no resources to help them." His wife immediately realized that her husband did not consider her wealth to be his. She gathered all her wealth in the middle of the room, mounds of it. She called the leaders of the Quraysh and pointed to them, "I want you all to bear witness. This day I have handed my entire wealth to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam." From that day on, he continued helping the poor, the weak, the needy. That was his life. But one thing he detested was idol worshipping. Whenever there was idol worshipping, he would give away from this life. Go away from Makkah and he would meditate. So he led a very simple life. Thomas Carlyle, he said, but from an early age, he had been remarked as a thoughtful man. His companions named him Alamîn, a man of truth and fidelity. True in what he did, in what he spoke and thought. They noted that he always meant something. This is Thomas Carlyle. The German poet Goethe says, "I have looked into history for a human paradigm and found it to be Muhammad, the actual example of humanity." Something amazing happens at the age of 40. While in the month of Ramadan, contemplating, while the rest of Quraysh were involved in idol worshipping, is sitting in the cave, reflecting on the creation of God. Suddenly, the angel comes to him, Gabriel, and says, "Muhammad, read. Iqra." He replied, "I cannot read." The angel embraces Muhammad and lets him go. The first experience, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam collapses to the ground. He lifts him up and says, "Read." Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "I'm not learned, I cannot read." He drops him, he falls to the floor again. The angel picks him up the third time and says, "Iqra, read. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq." Read in the name of your Lord who created. خلق الإنسان من علق, created man from a clot. اقرأ وربك الأكرم, read in the name of your Lord who is most bounteous. الذي علم بالقلم, who taught by the use of pen. علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم, taught man that which he knew not. Shocked by this experience, Muhammad leaves the cave. In every direction he looks, there is Jibreel standing, Gabriel standing, saying, "Oh Muhammad, I am Gabriel, and you are the messenger of God." In shock, he runs to his home. He runs to his wife and says, "Cover me." Some Milunism, "Cover me, cover me." When he recovers, she asks him, "What happened to you? What is the experience? Why are you in this state?" He relates the story to her, and she immediately accepts the message and becomes a Muslim. She says, "By Allah, you join the ties of relationship. You speak the truth. You bear people's burdens. You help the destitute. You entertain guests, and you help with the diversities of which affects the people, the problems of which affect the people. By Allah, He will not forsake you. She then takes Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to her cousin, who was a Christian. He hears the story and said, "This is the man who had been prophesied in our book." And he says to her, "This is the same Namus, the angel, whom Allah sent to Moses." Then he says something very strange. I wish I was young and could live up to the time when your people will turn you out." Muhammad becomes shocked. "They will turn me out?" He was the most loved man in his society, and he did not realize what was to come after. Then begins, ladies and gentlemen, his mission. He begins to preach the religion of truth, the one belief in one God, and his closest family members immediately embrace Islam. His closest friends, they immediately embrace Islam. The Quraysh at the beginning, the leaders, they see it as ridicule. What is this strange religion? Men and women equal? What is this religion? Slave and master should be fed the same? What is this strange religion talking about? Only one God? They ridiculed him. But what happened then was that some of the richer children from the families began to embrace Islam. They started seeing this as a threat. Then they began their persecution. Relentless persecution. The weak, the slaves were taken, they were tortured. Sumayya radiallahu anha was tortured. Sumayya radiallahu anha was tortured. Her husband was killed. Many of the Sahabas were killed at a very early age. What was the command for the rest of the Muslim? Kufu aydiyakum. Fold your arms. No retaliation, even in self-defense. Muslims were forbidden to retaliate, even in the worst torture that was happening. They took every persecution as it came. Then God commanded Muhammad ﷺ to send the weakest of his followers to what is now called Abyssinia or Ethiopia. There was a Christian king. The Muslims ended up in the court of the Christian king. He gave them asylum. The Muslims lived there. The Quraysh were not happy. They wanted to get their slaves back. So they sent an emissary to the king, lavished the king with gifts, and said, "Oh king, there are slaves here, we need them back." The king said, "I cannot put men in chains without speaking to them. Let me hear what they have to say." So he called the Muslims to gather at his court. And the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ spoke. And I want to use this statement to show the change that he actually made in society. Jafar, a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, at the court of the king in Abyssinia, he said, "Oh, your majesty, we were ignorant people, worshipping idols, eating carrion, oppressing neighbors, brother fighting brother, the strong dominating the weak, when amidst us was raised a man, Muhammad, whose nobility, integrity, and trustworthiness were already known to us." So he's relating what had happened. He called us to worship God alone. He commanded us to speak the truth, to honor our promises, to be kind to our relations, to be helpful to our neighbors, to cease all forbidden acts, to abstain from bloodshed, to avoid obscenities and false witness. The king, hearing the speech of the Muslims, the discussion continues, turns to the leaders of the Quraysh and he said, "I will not give them up to you." And says to the Muslims, "You may live in my land for as long as you wish." And the Quraysh returned. Unhappy at their return, unhappy being returned without their slaves, they continue their persecution. Persecution gets so worse that they now force Muhammad ﷺ and his family and his supporters out into the desert. This was one of the most difficult periods of time in his life. His wife Khadija, his uncle, who was not a Muslim, had all to live in the desert. Nobody was allowed to trade with them. Nobody was allowed to supply them with food. Nobody was allowed to marry to them. So they were in a complete social, political, economic boycott. This was a time when they were so hungry, they ate leaves of trees to put away the pangs of the hunger. They took that persecution. Again and again they continued. After that year, most saddest moment of Muhammad's life, his uncle who was there, who protected him all his life. All his life he was there to protect him, passed away. It's important to relate the story shortly before this incident. The Quraysh leaders, after trying everything to persuade Muhammad and stop his mission, and failing, tried one trick. They went to Abu Talib and said, tell your nephew to stop this message. Whatever he wants, we'll give him. If he wants to marry any woman in this community, ask him just to point to her, we will marry her to him. If he wants to be our king, ask him to say so, we will make him our king. If he wants wealth, we will give him all our wealth, but tell him to stop preaching his message. His uncle went to Muhammad ﷺ and said, "Oh my nephew, don't put any more burden on an old man than he can bear." Muhammad, in sorrow, replied to his uncle and he said, "If they put the sun on my right hand and the moon on my left, I will not stop this message, which is from God. His uncle returned, saying, "Oh my nephew, I will continue to protect you, as I've always done." Unable to protect, unable to stop, through torture, through killing, even boycott, they continued. Then his beloved wife Khadija, who has been at his side, whose wealth became the wealth of the Muslims, with which many of the poor and the destitute were helped, she also passes away. This year in the history of Muhammad is known as the year of sorrow. Suddenly, as things were getting very difficult in Makkah for Muhammad, a delegation of people come from Medina. Medina actually was called at that time Yathrib. They came, they were foretold by the Jews in their city that a prophet was to come. When they heard the message, they came to Muhammad and said, "We are ready to take you to our city. We will protect you. Come to our city." Because they had been fighting with each other, warring with each other, they wanted arbitration. This was the first year of Makkah. Muhammad sent them back with emissaries who preached Islam. They went back and they returned this next year with 70 or so followers, and they took the second pledge. This was the planning for Muhammad to migrate from Makkah to Medina. But before he went, he made sure all his followers were safe. He and Abu Bakr Siddiq were the last two to travel. The night before he was going, the Quraysh hatched their final plan to kill Muhammad The plan was very simple. If any one tribal person killed Muhammad, his family would want revenge. So they took 12 young men from each of the tribes, and they said, all of you would stab him at the same time. Therefore, when the blame is shared, his family would not be able to take revenge. Muhammad left in the middle of the night with his cousin Ali sleeping in the bed. When they discovered that Muhammad had gone, they sent an army or a posse of soldiers to collect Muhammad and said, "Whoever brings Muhammad back, he shall have 100 camels." So the journey continues. At this moment, I think it's quite important to look. What did he look like? You're describing a man, you're saying all these wonderful things, but I'd like to know what he looks like. As Muslims, we don't have any photographs or pictures, and we don't allow it. But let me relate a story again of what happened during the journey. While Muhammad was traveling from Makkah to Medina, he stood by a tent of an old woman whose name was Ma'bad. She was a very generous woman. Whenever any stranger passed by her tent, she would always offer them something. Muhammad arrived at her tent. At that time, she was alone with an old and dying goat. Muhammad said, "Do you have anything to offer us?" She said, "I have nothing. This is the year of drought. All the animals that were here, my husband has taken to pasture. The only thing left is here is this goat, which hasn't been given milk for years." Muhammad said, "Do you permit me to milk her?" He said, "By all means, go ahead." He makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he asks for a pot, and milk starts pouring from this goat. Muhammad gives the milk first to her, then to his companions, and he is the last person to drink. Leaves some milk for her husband, and he leaves with his companions. Her husband returns, surprised to see milk. Where did this milk come from? He starts relating a story. She starts relating the story of what happened. She said, "Describe him to me." And this is the description of a woman who only met him once. Very important. Such was the beauty of his personality. This is a description given by a woman who only met him once. "I saw a man who is handsome, of glowing countenance, of a good proportion, with neither a large stomach nor a small head. He is smart of appearance, with balanced features, deep black eyes, long eyelashes. His voice is not coarse. He has a long neck, a full rounded beard, thick eyebrows that meet each other. When he is silent, he is stately and composed. When he speaks, his appearance is impressive. He is the most beautiful and striking man from a distance, and the best and most beautiful from close up. He is well spoken, clear in what he says, saying neither too much nor too little, his words flowing forth like perfect string of pearls. He is neither too tall nor overtly short, a stately man in the company of two other stately men, here referring to Abu Bakr Siddiq, and he is the most prominent among them and the most well respected. As a Hindu scholar says, Muhammad was the soul of kindness, and influence was felt and never forgotten by those who were around him. So this is the